webinar on alternative certification model. My name is Susan Quinn. I am the education convener for the EIS. I just want to indicate to you that we are using WebEx. As you know, we're recording this for future use by the Institute. So if you don't want your face to be recorded, then please switch off your camera. However, it is really helpful to the speakers if they see some faces. So hopefully you're not all dead shy, retiring people, and you'll be happy to be on camera so that we have a wee bit of interaction going on here. The chat function will be open during this, and we would encourage you to use respectful and professionally use this during the course of your lesson to share any views on this. And we'll be monitoring that throughout and using it to kind of supplement any questions or anything else that we're asking. The event this afternoon will start with presentations from Andrea Bradley and from colleagues from the SQA, who will be represented this afternoon by Fiona Robertson, Jean Blair and Robert Quinn. Each of these two groups will be making a presentation of around 15 minutes, and then we will follow that up by taking your questions. Thank you to those who have submitted the questions in advance. We'll be taking those in the first instance around this. Before we get started, however, though, I want to say a few words. We just want to highlight that we all recognise, and all those involved in the work over the last number of months, recognise that this ACM has been designed and now been delivered in some of the most challenging circumstances that any of you will have faced in your teaching career, regardless of whether or not you're somebody that's brand new to the profession or somebody that has been around the block a few times and seen it, done it, and got the T-shirt around the changes that we've had in qualification processes. So we absolutely is recognised within that. And the most recent period of school closure has resulted in even greater pressures around delivering this model than were already there before Christmas. So definitely a real challenge. At national level, there has been some good collaboration among stakeholders so far through the discussions, but although they have been at times tense and difficult at points, and some issues remain to be resolved, and the EIS will continue to support members and to put forward members' viewpoints at the meetings. I believe that Andrea and Jean have just come straight from one of the working group meetings, so we are right up to date in where things are at. The EIS acknowledged the workload pressures that secondary staff are currently under and the concerns that they have about young people's ability to overtake the learning and complete the necessary assessment in time for the 25th of June submission. And this being particularly challenging for young people who have been affected disproportionately by COVID disruption. And we have questions that relate to this this afternoon. This teacher workload and wellbeing has been a key issue for us in all our work around the ACM, as have the young people's wellbeing and sound learning, teaching and assessment approaches amidst that many challenges that we face, and they will continue to raise these as the ACM rolls out over the coming weeks. So colleagues and EIS members, we hope will appreciate and understand that we continue to represent them on these matters right the way through to the 25th of June and beyond, in terms of how this is going forward at the moment. That all said, I'm going to pass over now to Andrea Bradley, Assistant Secretary for Education and Equality for the EIS. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks very much, Susan, for that. So as Susan said, we know that secondary teachers and FE lecturers are grappling with an incredible challenge at the moment in delivering the alternative certification model, and that pupils and students are under a lot of pressure too to get everything completed on time. We know that teachers are straining to do their absolute best for their pupils, as they always do, and that it's harder than ever at the minute. So thanks very much to all of you for taking the time to attend this event this afternoon. I wanted to start off by giving some context and outlining the EIS position in relation to some key elements of the alternative certification model. So the General Secretary and I represent the EIS on the two NQ21 groups, me the working group and he the steering group. And we've both tried to make sure throughout the discussions since they began last October that the alternative certification model would enable the prioritisation of learning, teaching and sound assessment, and that it would be deliverable in a way that takes account of workload and the well-being of teachers, and also their mental health and well-being. So a lot of things to try and balance here. So we understand that it might not feel like that for you at the moment when you're in the thick of delivering the ACM now, and you're supporting young people to try to do their best in very, very challenging circumstances within a very now truncated time window. Had the EIS been in charge of the process, would we have done things this way? No, we wouldn't have. So along the way, we suggested a number of alternatives. Initially, when the N5 exams were cancelled, we suggested that assessments could be conducted internally and marked externally by SQA colleagues. When the higher exams were cancelled, we suggested certification of S5 and S6 candidates only, or even that certification of S4 be delayed until the autumn or thereabouts. But in the run-up to an election, the Scottish Government was keen to see all young people certificated within this academic session, so we are where we are now. We also suggested that the national sampling exercise that's just beginning could focus on higher and advanced higher only, but this too was rejected as an option. So having come up with these various other suggestions and not having got too far with them, what's remained for us to do is to try to work with colleagues across SQA, ADES, colleges and Scottish Government, and in the steering group with parents and young people to try to shape the ACM as best we can in the interests of good learning, teaching and sound assessment, as Susan said, and related to that of course with teacher workload and well-being firmly in mind. We repeatedly pushed for additional time to be given over to the ACM at school level, and eventually the 2 additional inset days were granted by the Scottish Government. We also pushed for the reprioritisation of other remaining inset days so that time could be secured for local moderation activity, that being a key component of the ACM. We've aimed to have as much support channeled towards teachers as possible and as many additional demands resisted, because we understood from the outset that what was being asked of you as secondary teachers and as lecturers was huge. But it's also important to say that the alternative certification model was designed on the basis that all of the education system would be working together and in support of the schools, colleges and teachers who are working directly with the young people who are trying to complete their qualifications in spite of the significant disruption of this academic session. So at local level, teachers should expect the full support of senior colleagues in schools and colleges. And in turn, head teachers and department heads should expect full support from the local authority or the college management as they endeavour to do all that they can to support young people in S4, S5 and S6 and in FE at this time. And the EIS has been clear that delivering the ACM has to be the key priority for schools this term and for college departments that are delivering N5 higher and advanced higher. Other priorities which don't contribute to the safe delivery of the ACM need to be stood down or additional resources made available so that they can be overtaken. Teachers cannot and should not be asked to deliver what is required by way of marking, moderation and the associated record keeping for the ACM and everything else that they would otherwise might have been doing within a normal academic year. So in schools, for example, supply cover should be being brought in to decrease class contact time with BGE learners for teachers who are in the thick of delivering the ACM. Or a timetable change that doesn't absolutely need to happen this side of the summer holidays held over until August. Or administrative duties in a college department, for example, that are non-essential could be set aside or passed to admin staff where possible. One of the areas that we're on the case of currently is S3 SNSAs and collection of CFE levels data. We think it's absurd that the Scottish Government would expect schools, and especially secondary schools at this time, to be prioritising these things, and we wrote to the Deputy First Minister on this very issue last week, urging an urgent rethink. We've repeatedly said within the NQ groups that the time lost to the latest lockdown has really put the safe delivery of the ACM on a knife edge. Expecting teachers to deliver it and to carry on with everything else regardless just isn't acceptable. From an EIS perspective, as with all workload, the work associated with the ACM must be deliverable within the parameters of the 35-hour working week. Where teachers are fearful that workload will be unmanageable, or if they're already struggling with it, then a workload audit should be done. And it's helpful to do a workload audit working with others in the department if you can. Make a quick note of everything that's to be done for the ACM and any other tasks that you're asked to carry out. Estimate the number of hours required, and where the number of hours of class contact time plus time for preparation and marking plus collective activity time is more than 35, then there needs to be a conversation with your line manager around workload alleviation. And this might involve some adjustment of the working time agreement or possibly class contact time relief, depending on the roles of individual teachers in delivering NQ courses and the ACM. And if these conversations don't resolve the issue, then speak to your rep or the local association or branch secretary who will be able to support you further. For some EIS members, as well as the concerns about workload related to the ACM, there was unhappiness that the cancellation of the exams meant additional unpaid marking and associated moderation for them. Lots of the emails that we received round about that time were about payment for undertaking the assessment burden that would normally have sat with the SQA. So on behalf of those members, the question was repeatedly raised with SQA and Scottish Government, with the outcome that the Scottish Government agreed to make a £400 payment to teachers who would be involved in delivering the ACM. The recent media focus on the payment has maybe led to some misunderstanding that by accepting this payment, teachers' contractual terms and conditions relating to working time will be altered. This isn't the case. The normal mechanisms for workload control that I've already talked about remain in place. I think that the First Minister also caused a bit of confusion when she announced in the Parliament that the payment would be made pro rata. That hadn't been discussed anywhere before she said it, and we think was based on a misunderstanding of how school timetables operate, and of course has set some hairs running. We've advocated and will continue to advocate that every teacher who's fully involved in supporting the ACM will receive the full £400 payment. Only some employment scenarios would justify a pro rata payment, such as a 50-50 job share, where duties associated with the ACM are shared on that kind of basis. In terms of the features of the alternative certification model itself, I wanted to share with you the EIS thinking around some of the key principles. Firstly, professional judgment. From the outset and after the experiences of last year, we've tried to assert the principles of teacher professional judgment and the need for professional trust in teachers. The EIS is clear in its trust of teacher judgment and the need for the system as a whole to share that trust. We see teacher professional judgment supported by collaboration among colleagues as being central to the ACM process, and we envisage a longer-term transition to approaches to senior phase assessment that have teacher professional judgment at the heart. In terms of collaboration, as well as enhancing the strength of these judgments, collaboration around the moderation of assessment provides teachers with a degree of protection from pressure from students and parents or carers in relation to candidate results. And of course, collaboration needs time, and schools and local authorities and colleges should have been working together to create the time necessary for teachers and lecturers to undertake the necessary moderation. We know that LNCTs and negotiating fora within colleges have agreed approaches to local moderation that are proportionate and manageable, and which will maximise the use of the additional and remaining inset days for this purpose and any other time that can be freed up in either school or college settings. The EIS has also supported the premise that professional judgment should be based on evidence of demonstrated attainment. And again, this offers a protection to teachers who are making judgments and reflects the views of young people who were aggrieved last year at the use of the algorithm, which they perceived didn't take into account the assessment evidence that they themselves had produced in order to determine their grades. So the fairness principle is also at play here in terms of the requirement for demonstrated attainment. In terms of how the candidate evidence is generated, the EIS has been consistently of the view that schools shouldn't be running, or colleges for that matter, running their own high stakes exam diets in lieu of the SQA diet. So the ACM has afforded flexibility to schools and colleges in designing their approaches to assessment in the interest of maximising time for learning, teaching and sound assessment, and in the interest of safety, the well-being of students, minimising inequity and managing teacher and lecturer workload. As you know, there's been some concern with which the EIS shares that the scheduling of exam diets undermines this to a fair extent, especially when they're being run this early in the term, when really we should be seeing continuing support for young people around wellbeing and consolidation of their learning towards assessment that we think should happen later. We would like to have seen these take place as late in the term as possible to maximise young people's potential to perform at their best in them. So latterly in the NQ group discussions, the focus has been on extreme disruption to learning. Some of our members have been very concerned about the disproportionate impact of COVID disruption on certain groups of young people. So for example, those who've had to self-isolate multiple times or who are going to be offered COVID-related reasons during this term and are just going to be left in a position where they're missing a piece of evidence to complete. So we've been exploring with colleagues in the groups how we might address this. One outcome of these discussions has been an enhanced offer from eSchool, where schools can refer young people at risk of non-completion for a bit of extra support, either during the school day or after school, depending on their individual circumstances. Head teachers received information about this last week, so if you'd be interested in that support for your pupils and haven't had the details shared, then approach your head teacher, who should be able to, to provide the details of that for you. The group's also looking at further potential contingencies, and we're hopeful of reaching agreement soon around this so that as many young people as possible will be certificated for the work that they've done this academic session. The other area that we've been focused on most recently has been around appeals. As you know, there was a recent consultation on appeals and what an appeals model might look like in the context of the ACM. You will know from communications from the Education Department that the EIS advocated very strongly that appeals should sit with the SQA rather than be handled by schools, as was being proposed earlier on in the series of discussions that we'd had about it. So the outcome of that consultation process has been that appeals will rest with the SQA, as would be their usual responsibility, but we're still ironing out some of the final details of what that might look like in the end. So I hope that's been a helpful rundown of the headlines on EIS priorities in relation to the ACM. And of course, when the time comes around, I'll be happy to say a bit more on some of these areas and some of the other areas that you've had questions on when we come to that part of the event. But thanks very much for listening, and thanks, Susan.